Right, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming along to this year's Emmanuel Cooper Memorial Lecture, tonight to be delivered by Sara Flynn. For those of you that haven't met me before, I'm Ashley Howard and I'm from Farnham, where this whole thing originated. David Horbury, Emmanuel's partner, gave me permission to start a series of lectures that honoured Emmanuel. And we began in Farnham, and every year the event has gathered more and more momentum and support and interest, as borne out by everybody here this evening. Lovely to see you all, and thank you for coming along. So I'm just doing a quick intro to the intro. I shan't take up too much of your time, but let's not forget the man himself. There he is. That's why we're here. Emmanuel was a very caring tutor, certainly was, my experience of him, but he cared passionately about ceramics, and as you can see up there, some information that sort of paints a very broad and not very detailed picture of the stature that he still carries today within the field of British studio ceramics and indeed across the world. So it all began with his involvement in 318 Ceramics, which is a local collective, a charitable collective in Farnham, which was, I think, England's first world craft town. And Emmanuel agreed to be our patron and helped get us off the ground and get to the stage where we are now, where there are full classes with waiting lists, summer schools and workshops and other activities planned. And here are some that we've done over the years with Susan Halls, Dylan, Wally and Steve Brown, plus also technical workshops and specialist courses as well. 318 Ceramics works closely and has close ties with the University for the Creative Arts in Farnham, where I teach 3 days a week. That's borne out by some of the artists that work at 318 Ceramics. Alice is also an artist in residence at UCA. Kim studied at UCA for her PhD, and Judy did an MA, as did Bahare, who's here tonight somewhere. And here we all are. We're a bit thin on trustees at the moment because we operate a kind of cycle of trustees. So if there's anybody here this evening that's particularly good with bookkeeping and legal matters, then do please come and speak to us. Sarah, Glenda, Kathy and Stephanie are here, and they are the people that really run the enterprise and do a sterling job. And they very, very sweetly asked me to be patron. Obviously, I can't fill Emmanuel's shoes, but I'll try the best I can. And here is the iceberg of people that we've had speaking, of which Sarah's tonight's tip. So we began in 2014 with Simon Olding, pictured there. And his support in those early stages was extremely welcome. And as you can see, it's a very illustrious list of names there. And now I'm going to hand over to Stephen Knott, Dr. Stephen Knott of the Craft Study Centre, to talk about the Craft Study Centre and our efforts in Farnham. And thank you to 318, the Craft Study Centre, the RCA, University for Creative Arts, to David Horbury, Emmanuel's partner, who is here tonight, and to State Ceramics for helping to really support this lecture series. Thank you. There we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashley. My name's Stephen Knott, and I'm the Director of the Craft Study Centre. Big welcome to everyone tonight. Thank you very much for coming. And like Ashley, I won't take up too much time. Just a couple of slides, really, to sort of talk about, just to introduce you to the Craft Study Centre very briefly. The Emmanuel Cooper Lecture is a core part of the Craft Study Centre's programme. And it's an annual event that, since 2014, has brought researchers, practitioners, curators, students, and those with a passion for ceramics together to hear a prominent speaker. And as Ashley showed you, it's quite a list. And we're thrilled to be kind of part of it, and a huge amount of credit to Simon Olding for setting it up and doing so much work in those early years. For those that don't know, the Craft Studies Centre is a research centre and a museum, an accredited museum, based in Farnham, part of the University for the Creative Arts. We have object collections in 4 material areas, including ceramics. We were formed in 1970 by a group of craftspeople, collectors, and advocates for crafts, they got together to form a national collection of British studio craft. And we moved from Bath, where we were originally located, to Farnham in the early 2000s, and as I mentioned, a part of the University for the Creative Arts, who built the museum, the building in which we now occupy. What we do can be kind of boiled down to these 4 areas. We have 2 exhibition spaces in Farnham, one of which always shows the permanent collection on show. We have a varied programme of events, including this lecture series and the Henry Hammond lecture series, and we're part of the World Craft Town Partnership, which in 2020, Farnham was the first World Craft City in the UK. And we actively collect to build a collection that is relevant for the future and reflects the diversity and interest in studio craft. Just a very quick slide on our current exhibition. There's flyers on your seats that I peppered around before everyone arrived. Black Atlantic Makers Conversations is on until May, which partners the Tapestry of Black Britons, which is a narrative of the integral role of Black Britons in the nation's history, alongside the work by black makers in the Craft Study Centre's collection, as well as a number of loans. The intention of the show is to show the scope of black making in the 4 material areas of the Craft Study Centre, as well as the kind of intergenerational dialogue between makers. So we've got featured Magdalena Dondo, Lawson Oiken, Ranti Bam, Mawene Kata in ceramics, as well as, for example, the wood turner Donald Bow and textile artist Marcia Bennett-Mallet, as well as the work in our collection by Althea McNish. And there's a lecture, the next lecture that we're running is down in UC at Epsom on the 15th of April. So please do come along to that. That's on the flyers that I left around. So back to tonight. I want to do a few more thank yous. Ashley's already read out the list of those that have really helped sort of build the momentum of the Emmanuel Cooper lecture. So really want to thank 318 Ceramics, the Royal College of Art and the volunteers, the AV, and Liz for kind of hosting us tonight and hosting us all. Thanks to the Craft Potters Association and Ceramic Review for promoting the lecture in the months leading up to now. And particular thanks to State Ceramics for this year being the first year that they're supporting us in delivering this lecture, enabling us to run the lecture, promote it more, improve dissemination and documentation of the lecture for people who can't make it here today. They can watch it on high-quality video afterwards, and to think about ways of enhancing this lecture's impact to ripple outwards from this evening, to think about how we can nurture the wider appreciation, discussion and debate about studio ceramics. So thank you very much for all our supporters this year. And so now it gives me great pleasure to welcome Sara to give this year's lecture. Sara was born and educated in Cork, Ireland, and since 1999 has been making work, first functional pots, and then the more sculptural forms in porcelain for which she has become known. She throws with forms cut, pinched, moved around, pushed, squeezed, pulled, and she assiduously researches glaze, much like Emmanuel Cooper, and brings together this surface quality and texture on the pieces she creates with the form. She's represented by Erskine Hall & Co in London and has exhibited internationally and is in many public collections, including the V&A, the Fitzwilliam Museum and the Gardiner Museum in Toronto. So please could you join me in welcoming Sara Flynn.
I'll lower that. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to set a quick timer for myself to keep track of time. And I've asked to be interrupted 50 minutes in. So if you hear one of the team here giving me a nudge, they're not being rude. They're doing exactly what I've asked them to do. Okay. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you to everybody from Ashley, Liz, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's an absolute pleasure to get to share what I do. I was chuffed to be asked for obvious reasons, but to let you know, when I started in college, I didn't have, ceramics culturally wasn't part of my education in school or anything like that. And when I started in the Crawford, I was introduced to glazing, and I just got bitten by the bug instantly. And this book, I think at the time in the library in Cork, we had 2 copies, and it was before colour photography. So we're talking about describing glazes with no colour. Really early copies of the book, and there was a fight to get to loan them. So this was a copy that I bought myself when I lived in London in the 90s. But Mr. Cooper had a profound effect on me in terms of understanding that the world of glaze was infinite and exciting and torturous and wonderful. So it's a pleasure to be here to tell you about my story. This first slide is really a kind of to give a very important nod to my mum, as a way, as a child, of understanding a creative way of thinking. So my mum painted, and she would do drawings, landscapes and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people thought that that was where my sort of artistic leaning came from. And as I looked into it more deeply, I don't believe that's true. I think it came from her overall sense of creative thinking. We lived in the countryside in a house that my dad wanted us to live in, but they were completely stretched financially. And this was in the 70s. And my mum had to be unbelievably resourceful to make things work. Really strong person. She created that garden from scratch, from cuttings from friends and going and visiting other gardens. And she made that garden from scratch, from literally a field. And we were only there for 18 years. So this passion and creative thinking was unbelievable. But also because she didn't have money in the house, she would do things like with old clothes. She would make bedspreads. She would get old furniture and do it up, and she grew her own vegetables, grew her own fruit, made jams and preserves, made her own bread. There was creativity everywhere, and it was unbelievably inspiring. Now, before we get too carried away with the fact that that was me being amazing, I'm going to show you some of you may have seen this before. This is my school report from 1984. I was 13, and you can have a look at my grades here. E, C, D, B, E, D, F, E, and a D. The one at the very bottom, Sarah, can be very giddy and easily distracted. That's probably still true. Sarah has plenty of ability, but is wasting all her time. She talks in class, avoids work. Disgraceful result, Sarah does no work at class or at home. And the one that I think is most thing is Sarah should be ashamed of herself. So you can imagine there was no TV that night when I got home. So let's not say I was a model student. I just didn't fit with school at all. I had a great time, but I wasn't studying. So we roll on then to where things really did click for me, and that's the Crawford College of Art and Design. I think part of the reason that I fell into loving college so much, apart from the fact that I discovered clay and loved it, I also definitely had a thing of wanting to prove myself, having been such a messer in school. So I felt I had something to show that I was capable of knuckling down. When I mentioned the road trip with clay in the sort of the promo for the talk, I talk about it being a road trip, but really when you think about most road trips and stories that you see, it's really about the people you meet on the way and the characters. I have the utmost respect for Roisin Collins, who was my tutor. Between these two dates, I'll explain about the gap in a minute. Roisin explained to me the rigour of studio practice, the fact that you would need to be in studio minimum 9 o'clock every day. You would need to work until 5 o'clock minimum every day. To work with clay, you need to understand the material. In order to do that, you have to keep on putting one foot in front of the other, hours in, hours in. Eventually it will pay off, but you'll have a lot of time of frustration and making things that don't look very good, making pieces that aren't working, and that's part of the journey, and to understand it and keep engaging with it. So that penny dropped with me, and Roisin basically would just say, jump, and I would say how high. I trusted her implicitly, and she was an amazing guide for me. In terms of the dates that are there, unfortunately, I don't have any photographs really from this time in college, which is a shame. But you can see the building. It's in Cork City, and it's a proper old art college, and I just loved it. I went there initially from 1989 to 1992, and then I went back for an extra year. So the extra year is because I went away from Cork to London. And in that time, I didn't work with clay at all. I had all these ideas that I was going to, I was getting Time Out magazine. This was before the internet and everything, getting Time Out magazine and saying I was going to go to the cinema and I was going to go to all these shows. But the job that I had when I was there was in Harrods. And I have this name badge is still up in the studio. And the job was not a good one. I was just working on the shop floor. I did a management course, which was great to get me tuned in to time management and working with people and that sort of thing. But the job itself wasn't creatively inspiring at all. But part of what was so good about that was also it made me hungry, because I didn't get to touch clay at all in that time. And I really missed it. So because I was missing it so much, I went back to Roisin in the Crawford and said, I have nothing to show from my few years away. I haven't done a drawing in that time. I have no portfolio built up. I haven't touched any materials. But if you could give me a chance to come back for one extra year to do the degree at the time, I said, I promise, I won't let you down. So she said, come on back. So I did. Moved back from London to Cork again. And I haven't stopped making since then. That was in 1997. In terms of more inspiring people along the way, I was given an opportunity in Kinsale, which is my hometown, to open a studio. And that help was invaluable. I worked there from 1999 to 2005. It was a small studio, tiny space in Kinsale with a retail space at the front. So I had this idea that I would make work and sell it, because now I have retail experience and I can sell the pots and make the pots and everything will be amazing. And until I realized that working in a public space actually didn't suit me at all, to the point where it was making me deeply unhappy. Also because I was making functional work, which was my bread and butter, really important. I had to make some money. But I was not interested really in function as my skills started to improve. I wanted to play a bit more. So the next slide's important because the biggest part of that slide is about play. And this is what feeds me now, and I hope will continue to feed me for my whole career. It's that sense of what if, that sense of, the next time I do that, I'm going to do it slightly differently. Or what if I do it that way? Or what if I do it that thing twice? Or what if I don't do that thing to the clay at all? What if I do it earlier? What if I do it later? All that kind of stuff. And the play, I just find it with the material and engagement with material. That element of play is crucial to me developing new work. So the pushing, the pulling, the rolling, I work with slabs, I work with throwing. I noticed that the throwing picture is not the largest one. I'm not super passionate about throwing. I love the surface it gives me, and I love the speed at which it gives me a surface if I throw a vessel. But then it's the playing and pushing and pulling and scratching and scraping and changing. That's the bit that's interesting for me. So that play was starting to also feed into slightly new, different forms, moving away from function. And this was much more interesting to me. So it's not that function is better or worse, or that sculptural pieces are better or worse. It's about what was interesting and important to me and what I want to make. So these sculptural pieces started to emerge. So what happened next was the Kinsale aspect of it didn't justify having the shop with the studio. So I moved to my second studio, which was down in West Cork, which was about maybe an hour and a half away from Kinsale. And if you you don't need huge imagination to look at that coastline and imagine that that's probably a completely beautiful part of the world, which it is. But I remember I was speaking to Sebastian Blackie, and he was asking me about inspiration for my work. And he was saying, you live in a really beautiful part of the world. I'm sure that must feed it in. And I was saying, you know what? A number of years ago, I might have nodded along and said, yes, that's exactly what feeds the work. But I said, actually, it's not true. My studio window didn't look onto any gorgeous rolling landscape or any amazing coastline or anything like that. And he gave me the confidence while we were talking to say, so really what you're talking about is that the solitude of the studio and that utter focus that gives you is what feeds your relationship with the material and how the work is allowed to play and gather on. And I felt really energized by not having to say, oh, the coastline, it spires, and here are the rolling fields. And so that was liberating to go, actually, yeah. And then the truth is, it is about my relationship with material and that utter focus. And I just need to be left alone and not sort of viewed or judged while I'm making that work. Because the work, when it's being developed, looks awful. And I have a small chapter in the talk on process, and you'll see what I mean. And at one time when I was in the college, in my last year, I was making work and pushing and pulling. And a fellow student came over to me and said, he was looking at this piece that wasn't finished. And he said, is that finished? Are you done? Are you going to do anything else to that? And at the time I was a bit like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know if I'm finished, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it next. And I found myself, I felt really vulnerable. So from that moment and from the Kinsale experience on, I realized I would always need a private studio. So the West Cork studio allowed me, I'm going to run through about 11 slides quite quickly now, of how the work started to change. This was a really formative, creative time for me. I started to get much more confident with the alterations I could make. I'm working with porcelain all the time. It's not the best material or a better material, or I totally don't subscribe to the hierarchy of clays or anything like that. It happens to be the right material for me. It brings limitations. It cracks very easily. It moves a lot. It certainly limits scale. However, it's got a beautiful smooth quality. The thrown quality is gorgeous for that, and attention that when I alter makes a huge difference. There's no grit or grain in the clay to come to the surface when I'm making those edges. So it's not necessarily the best or only, but it's a bit like play. Clay and porcelain in a private studio will carry me through, I hope, for forever. So this was a piece that went to SOFA Chicago, and that was a piece in collaboration with Joseph, who I'll discuss later again. As the work was being developed, we were also, a few of us in Ireland at the time, understood that we were making work for which there wasn't a market in Ireland. And that's not a criticism of Ireland at all. It's a small country with a small population, but it has a limited market for some of the things we want to make. So we were starting to understand that if we want, I understood, and Joseph understood, and Liam Flynn, who has since passed away as a wood turner, Joe Hogan, a number of us at the time in Ireland realised we needed to find markets outside of the country. And at the same time, the Irish Crafts Council also had that recognition. And they took us to things like SOFA Chicago and to Collect, and said we need to look outside of the country, we need to understand what's going on with different markets. And this was the sort of work I was making at that time. And when I say they took us, initially they would do a part fund for a flight so that you could go over to London for a day trip and go and have a look, go to Collect and see what was happening. And also the same for Chicago. And then they took a stand at Collect and SOFA Chicago, and they took some of us and represented us there to get our work seen with a different audience, which was an incredible opportunity. So this work was developing in Loewe at the time. And just to explain again about porcelain and its kind of idiosyncrasies, this is the kind of thing that happens a lot in the making process. So again, to get off the Instagrammable, everything's fabulousness, everything isn't. And these pieces, the tension on a lot of the alterations I'm making is really, I'm asking for trouble, and a lot of the time I get it, but not always. And it's when it works out, it's deeply satisfying. So I'm just going to carry on through. This is more of the play and development that was happening in all of that time in West Cork. Just getting more confident with the material and just seeing what I could do with it. This time would bring me up close to when I would have been at Collect with the Irish Crafts Council. So there's two things that happened there. First of all, I was introduced to Matthew Hall, who's here tonight, who I work with now, and we have a super relationship, gallery and maker. So I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But I also met Elizabeth Fritsch. She had done a talk at her stand in Collect. And afterwards, I met her outside and I totally fangirled her. I just went up and I said, I remember when I was working in Harrods, there was a retrospective exhibition of yours on in Pentonville Road in the Crafts Council exhibition there. And they did the exhibition was stunning. But also they made a poster that was in the Tube at the time. And I remember going to and from Harrods and seeing the poster. And I bought the poster and it was part of my, I've got to get back to working with clay. So I told her this story, and she said, do you want to come to see my studio? And I was like, would I? So the following day, I went to see her studio, and I walked in, and I started crying as soon as I walked into the space. Totally embarrassed myself, bought nice biscuits, and started crying. And she had all these exquisite pots around her apartment space, and like iconic pieces, and I was just, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. And it was just, it was really generous of her to invite me into her private space. And we talked about pots. And one of the things I remember once I got over the sort of overwhelming bit and I could relax more into the conversation, I asked her about scale, because the question of scale keeps coming up. Mostly from myself, the sort of nagging voice in the back of my head of, I wonder if I could make it bigger, I should make it bigger, and I'm repeatedly disappointed. And I know part of that is my choice of material, so I have to I keep having a sort of a push-pull with that. And when I asked her about scale, she did this lovely thing. She just sort of intimated holding and decorating the pot. So she didn't even say anything, she just went, kind of like this, and no words needed. She was going, well, there's my scale limit right in front of you, so that's as big as I'm going to make it, and I'm not going to apologize to anybody about it. So she decorates, holding them like babies, and it sort of, sometimes I need to go back to that to remind myself that it's okay to say there are limits to, it's my physicality, it's the length of my arms, it's my strength or not as I get older, it's those things. So it's just, That meeting was really special. Such a generous person, and there was a beautiful retrospective exhibition of hers in the Hepworth, which is now over, and I hope you all went because it was stunning. So I do a jump now, and this is back to my relationship with Matthew. I put in, I think, maybe a couple of pieces to the summer show in Gallery Besson when Anita was still there, as a result of having met Matthew at Collect. So there was a direct relationship to the Irish Crafts Council bringing us over to allowing a commercial relationship to potentially happen. And after that summer show, when Matthew had taken over the gallery, he offered me a solo exhibition, which was huge, absolutely huge for me as an opportunity, as a goal, as an option to raise my game once again. So that happened in 2012, and that was a really pivotal moment. It also marks a time when I was finishing with my studio and I was moving to Belfast. I was moving to Belfast because I met a man, and it was an exciting time. Apart from love was in the air. I had had such a creative time in West Cork. I was ready and excited for a change, and it was the opposite end of the country, which for my friends was they were freaking out. And I think at the time people thought they were freaking out because I was going to Belfast, and Belfast might be scary. And it wasn't that. It was because basically Belfast isn't Cork. Because the world is Cork if you're from Cork, and if you're not, you should go to Cork. So, and these lovely hands, he's going to kill me. My husband makes pots. He thought he was going to escape without being part of the presentation at all, so he's going to murder me after this. He makes pots. He makes beautiful functional ware. We don't cross over with what we make at all, but do we encourage and compare notes and delight in good firings and share moaning about bad firings or glazes going wrong. It's the most important relationship in my life. So there you go. Little bit about process. So when I say that I start with throwing, this is a good example of kind of a starting point of, I'm going to start by throwing basically cylinders. So you can see the outline of all of these forms are essentially cylinders. So I start by throwing a cylinder, and then I do the cutting and pasting, which gets me to pieces like these. But the cutting and pasting looks awful en route. So I've got a couple of slides to show you the sort of principles of things. Actually, sorry, before I go on to those, I'm going to go back for two. So this is the start of an idea on paper, which makes these pieces, which is all well and good. Then pieces like these I couldn't draw. And this is a very good example of relationship with material. So while I'm on a journey saying I'm going to start with my cylinder, I'm going to cut, I'm going to fold, I'm going to put it back together again, I'm going to see what happens. Sometimes if I'm allowing myself to just go with the flow, forms like this will come about that I couldn't possibly draw. It happens with that bit that I was talking about earlier of, I wonder what if I did it that way, and I wonder what if I did it that way. I couldn't set out and draw this, so it has to happen with the relationship with material. Now, en route to that is a lot of really horrible pots, but sometimes, and hopefully the idea is that one learns from that experience, and so long as you clock why it didn't work, where it went wrong, what's wrong with the proportions, those sorts of things. If you clock that kind of stuff, it should be that you put that experience into the next piece, and every next piece should and could possibly be better. So this is the journey. So we start with a thrown form, and then we do cutting and pasting, and don't they look absolutely awful? And this is the part where if you were being observed while making, you'd just give up. You'd go home, and if somebody was sitting next to you, they'd go, seriously, Sarah? Like, are you joking? And then you keep working, and you keep scratching, and you keep scraping, and it starts to come good. And then I've only got one photograph of a finished piece from this series because the other two cracked and didn't work out, but this one did. So I'm going to go back to just give you another minute to look at that. So thrown form, really super simple canvas to start with. Then you do the cutting and the pasting, literally cutting, sticking it back together again, folding it, seeing if it stays together or not, learning from it, tidying it up, and hopefully getting it through the firing. So I love the process, but it's not without its kind of ups and downs. This is a photograph of the studio, and what's significant really about this is the wheel is tucked in under the table, so the wheel is not the driving force behind everything, it's just the starting point. The interesting bit really happens on the table. That's the kind of cool stuff. That's where the bit that lights my fire happens. And speaking of firings, I fire now only with electric. I used to fire with gas and electric and do reduction firings on electric. And now I fire only with electric. And just as a little tip, I love Northern Kilns. I'm a big fan of Northern Kilns. If anybody's doing any kiln shopping, they're in Lancashire, and I rate them very highly. That's just a little tip. I'm not getting any commission for that. So, on to some other amazing people I've met in my road trip, and opportunities. And this is really touching on some important collections. The Duke of Devonshire had pieces of mine over a number of years, and I've got examples of this collection and another person who's collected of my work. And what's significant is that the lovely part of that relationship started without me even realizing that the pots were being collected. So these pieces were put together over a number of years from a number of different points in my making time. So I found that really inspiring, and then to see them on display at the time, at a period of time they were on in the main dining room in Chatsworth, but the pieces are they might span maybe 8 or 10 years, some of those pieces, and I found that got such a buzz out of the idea that one pot was bought from one place before. When I was still living in Lepp, there would have been maybe a gallery somewhere, and then that the Duke had such a good eye and feel for how my work was developing, and that was a new thing for me to understand, that way of collecting existed, and that it was so personal. I just found it really really meaningful, and it changed my confidence when I realized this kind of thing was happening. Another time something like this happened was Disobedient Bodies, an exhibition in the Hepworth Gallery, which was curated by Jonathan Anderson. And these pots, I was invited to the opening, and I didn't realize these pots had been collected by Jonathan. He had been buying them in a similar way to the Duke. They had been bought at different times over a different period, and again, he was responding to work himself without a connection personally with me at the time. And he put them together with these were neoprene pieces from very early J.W. Anderson. These were in the same exhibition that they were incredible. There was a Giacometti, and Magdalena Dundo's work was there, Lucy Rees, Hans Koper. I was just blown away to be part of that. And it came by stealth. I didn't realize it was happening. So that was amazing. This is an exhibition or a photograph of the work in Jonathan's private collection. So some of these are the same pots there, redistributed and put together I just think it's absolutely stunning. And again, the cluster of pieces is put together not by me as an installation, it's been put together personally by the person who's decided at separate times to buy each pot and gather them together. I think that's really gorgeous. So those two collections had a really profound effect on me about understanding how somebody would personally gather and place and curate, and I found it really cool. This leads on to the Loewe Foundation Craft Prize, which I applied for in the first year. That was 2017, I think the application was. And this photograph is of the piece on the far left, is the piece that I submitted. A beautiful photograph. So glad I went in on the first year, because it has swollen since then. And it was such a good experience to be part of that exhibition, and to be recognized as a finalist, which was really amazing. And if it stopped at that, I would have been delighted with myself. But since then, I was asked to take part in the experts panel, which I've done so for 8 years. And I'm delighted to say a fellow expert is in the room. Antonia is here as well. Thank you for joining us. So that's us over the years. And what we do is we gather in Madrid once a year, and we're the first line where however many of us are on the panel that year, will gather and whittle down 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 entries down to 30 finalists. So that's our job. We whittle down to the finalists. The finalists then become the exhibition that year. And then we're not part of the kind of horrible final decision about who actually wins. We've stepped off at that point. But it's been such a privilege to be part of that world. I know from a finalist point of view how it feels to be on that final list is huge and potentially life-changing, and you're so looked after as part of that kind of family later. So to have been part of that journey for this long is really, really amazing. So it's a bit of a pinch me moment. Yeah, really special. In connection with Loewe, at the time also, I was commissioned to do a collection of work to go on display in this granary in Miami, in the Loewe store in Miami at the time. And the brief was, it was curated by Jonathan, and it was Lionel Wendt, Richard Smith, and myself. Richard Smith of the kite features, sculpture, and then the photography on the side along by Richard Smith. And that was a really big deal for me as well, to be asked to make this body of work. I was given complete freedom, which was incredible. There was no strict brief. It was, here's the scale of the vessel of the old granary. Make whatever you like, which was incredible. This again boosted my confidence and allowed me to, I was starting to get a bit more experimental with colour. We got to go over to Miami and help to install the work, but also then to see people's reaction to it. And it was now starting to be, because of that connection with the Craft Prize, that a whole new audience was also engaging with ceramics and with craft. And really incredible to be part of that at the time and see people coming in from the fashion world and looking at pots. Really, really cool. Okay, a bit of a chapter about glazes. I love this quote here. So, a great pot with a mediocre glaze becomes a mediocre pot. A mediocre pot with a great glaze remains a mediocre pot. So, it's really and truly so annoying. It's the absolute making or breaking of work for me, is the glazing. For me, there's such an array of colours and tones and surfaces that can come through ceramics that's unlike any other material that it can offer. It can look like other materials, it can be completely unique, it can feel like a whole universe. You can hone in on it and just get completely lost. You can have shiny surfaces, matte surfaces, cratered surfaces. We're back to Mr. Cooper again, and him introducing that whole world of, oh my God, what can't you do? So glazing's really important to me. And here's a really awful photograph of my journey, how it starts. So we're back to things looking awful on the kind of the investigative stage. So when I've made a pot that didn't work out, I'll bisque it anyway, because I need to use it for glaze tests. And I will literally just pour glazes on under and over each other, but I keep meticulous notes on which was over, which was under. It will make a difference if something was on thick or thin. And sometimes with these tests, they look absolutely horrendous. And there may be that, with all of those tests, I'm not finding anything in it that I love, but there may just be a clue in there somewhere. So it may be at the top section where the pink had an overlap of where the black bled into it with the bit of the green. Did something magic just there? Actually, there's a little clue there that's doing something that I'm really interested in, and then that will give me the opportunity to clock it, not try and remember because I couldn't in a fit, but go back to my notes to see what did that mean? What was P75 in 2017, and what was the 50-50 mix, and was that black over it or under it? And go and then put it on an actual piece. And then that journey takes on a whole other thing, because it may not do that on the whole actual piece. It may do that magic bit that I liked just on a section, but then it's why. Because the answer's in there, and it's for me to extract it and to find out, so it's not doing it in that section of the piece, but it is in that other. What's the difference? Where was it in the kiln? Did it fire higher? Was it lower? A bit cooler? All of that stuff. So that's a kind of a window into my thinking, and I just find it a really exciting way of quickly getting clues. But that's all they are. And this is a very good example of essentially the same pot, if you like, but with very different glazes. So I think it was Mark Jacobs gave some thing online. He gave a talk about material, and he was talking about designing dresses. And he said sometimes you have the idea of the dress you want to make, and then you go and find the fabric, the material you're going to use. And sometimes you have the fabric, and it suggests what kind of garment you want to make. And as he was describing that, I thought that's exactly the same as glaze. It's exactly the same. Sometimes you find a glaze, and it can suggest how it's going to move on a form. And then that starts to feed in how you start to plan what form you're going to make. Or sometimes you have the form and you need to find the right glaze that's going to be the right fit for it. So I find this a very good example of very different glazes on essentially the same pot, and how we read them is so different. And that alone, as a brief, could send you down a career rabbit hole of making. So it's never-ending inspiration. Again, similar pots, similar alterations, completely different glazes. Some of these glazes also will do different things in a repeat firing. So that's an experiment that could, again, be a rabbit hole of a third firing could actually make a huge difference. Let's investigate that. Let's record the differences. I mean, it's just so incredibly rich. This piece came about because of understanding how the glaze would vary by thickness. So this is just one glaze from one bucket. It's sprayed on, and because I understood from earlier pieces that the thickness made a huge difference to how the glaze would behave, it suggested putting it on a form that would show that off. So when I sprayed the glaze, I allowed the glaze to catch and be thicker in some areas and thinner in other areas, so it would highlight the form. Again, really sort of exciting stuff, I think. A couple of images of these are just from my iPhone now, a couple of these, but so the quality isn't amazing, but just as sort of a window into that idea of the kind of universe of what glaze surfaces can do. I mean, they're just incredible. These are pieces, I wish I had the year on this because my years are rolling away on me. But these pieces were in Erskine Hall. I can't remember the year. But what was significant, apart from you can see colour and more confidence in colour and forms are developing, there was a collector who supported me to get work into the V&A, which was a really big deal. So those two pieces there, I'm going to go back. Those two pieces are here in Erskine Hall. So Christopher Gorman Evans, I texted him to make sure it was okay to name check him, and he said it was. He suggested that those pieces be in the V&A collection, and my work hadn't been in the collection before, and he was hugely supportive in making that happen, which meant a lot to me. And that, again, in terms of confidence boosting, because sometimes you can feel like you're going a bit mad and you can feel like you're not sort of getting somewhere. You can feel a bit lost, especially in the studio on your own. That was a really nice career moment, so I really appreciated that. This is where colour starts to get more brave again and starting to play with palette and surface. And then we had, this is lovely installation shot in Erskine Hall. So such an iconic space. I mean, the fact for me that Lucy Ree and Hans Koper were showing pots there when they were making pots in London is just really cool for me. The idea that they came up those stairs with boxes of pots and put them in that same space is really, really inspiring. So it means a lot to me. This is sort of maybe from about 3 years ago, and again, continuing to play with colour and glaze and installation. I have a couple of images coming up about sort of opportunities with other people, so getting out of the sort of just me making my own pots. With Loewe, I was taken to Dubai in 2022. The Suhoor dinner is a women-only dinner, a celebration with Afsaneh Modiramani, who is a textile artist from Tehran. And she and I exhibited together at this very beautiful dinner, and had some amazing conversations with some really interesting people. Very out of the studio now, definitely moment. Beautiful textiles, and really nice opportunity for me to see them, my work displayed in a very different context. So a gorgeous opportunity. I did an exhibition. I got the date wrong, and this is actually 2024. Joseph and I did an exhibition where we did a true collaboration, where Joseph had made these brackets, which were part of an exploration he had done for Chatsworth House. And he asked me to make pots to go with the brackets. So we made all these pairings and we exhibited them in Paris in 2024. And I hadn't worked that way before. It was a really, it was a great challenge. I was sort of concerned that the scale of my work not being huge might not work with the brackets, but we were really, really pleased with the presence that they had together. And one thing about Mr. Walsh, which I want to mention, he and I had a fight in London, probably, oh God, I know, it might have been 2009 or something. I was doing, maybe 2008, I was doing Ceramic Art London, and it's really expensive to do Ceramic Art London from Ireland. You've got to crate it, you've got the accommodation, everything. That or Origin Craft Fair, which is where I started in trying to get my work over here. It made no financial sense, and Joseph said to me, well, kind of, what do you want to get from the show? And I was sort of saying, well, it'd be nice if I covered my costs, and he kind of just stopped the car and said, that's not going to work. If you're just, kind of with your, head down and saying, if I cover my costs, that'll be fine. He said, you need to value yourself more and feel you can achieve more. And I'll never forget the conversation, because it was tough, but he was right, and it made a difference to my psychology. So I owe him for that argument. Then in 2025, Joseph was asked to curate an exhibition in Japan, and I was able to put that body of work together. Again, the brief was completely broad. Here is the space, what do you want to put on it? So I was just like, well, actually, I would love to show a variety of forms, dancing and in chatting with each other, and to show a breadth of glazes. And he was just sort of, knock yourself out, put together your best body of work, and it will show. So it was a really, really gorgeous exhibition, and really super opportunity to put that work together with my own curation. Quick diversion into design into production collaboration that came as a total curveball to me in 2025. It completed in 2025, but the suggestion was probably made in 2023. So Tekla are primarily a fabric brand, and they make beautiful bedding and linen and towels and gorgeous duvets and things like that. And they were moving into apothecary, which they had never done before. And they approached me with a very open, honest brief of, we want to make a refillable candle. We want it to be something that lasts. We don't want it to be something that somebody throws away after one use. We want the scents to be gorgeous. That's on us. And we want you to make the vessel. Are you up for it? And I consulted a couple of people who I trusted enormously, and people who have collected my work, and asked them if they thought it would be a good idea or not, because I thought, I think it's a good idea. I feel right about them, but I've never done anything like this before, and I don't know. What do you think? And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Certainly, comments about if I had been younger in my career, it might have been more of a risk, or might have not been clear about me, but for where I was at the time, that it felt right, and they supported it as well. I'm so glad I did it, because I learned so much. Slip casting for me in college, I had no interest. We went to Portugal to have the work made. The brand is based in Copenhagen, and we were a very good fit. The refillable bit meant that we had to do, won't bore you with the techie bit too much, but essentially it's a double-walled vessel, so that when the candle's burned, you can just drop another one in. And that was really important to me as a creative challenge as well. And to work in Portugal, having made loads and loads and loads of samples, dealing with the team there about which ones they responded to more. Mostly they were saying, which one do you like best, Sarah? We need it to be that that you're so proud of what you make. So I said, well, actually, I think this one's good. And we put it into production in Portugal, and I learned a lot even then once they had scanned the piece in on how to get, it was really important we got the rim right, where that inner vessel connected with the exterior needed to have a particular quality, and they were hugely supportive of getting it over the line. It was a real pleasure. We launched in Paris in October, and this is just a handy photograph to show you. They brought along in Paris a lot of the samples I'd made and some early prototypes and sort of kind of real sort of sketches to start the conversation going, and we exhibited them. And that's installation of work that they've also put in their London store, which is in Marylebone High Street. So the pieces are there, which was a real gift to me to give. It's a kind of context as well of where the vessel has come from, that they're from the same maker with a different approach. Back to Cork, which is really cool. This is the sort of the end of the road trip, pretty much, which I'm as a Taurian, I don't like moving very much. I like nesting, and for a Taurian, I have done a lot of moving and not very much nesting. So this is a really, really cool part for us. And these last few images that are coming up are of, sorry, I'll just go back for a sec. They're of so really the most up-to-date, the most current where I am now moment with my work. So this is today, pretty much today's Sara. Composite vessels, singular vessels. The last exhibition I did in Erskine Hall was of small pieces, which was a really lovely, indulgent exhibition that Matthew facilitated. I said, I just want to play with loads of small pots and really play with glazes. And it was working just in small scale, had a totally different rhythm to changing and swapping scale, and I'd never been able to indulge it like that before. So that exhibition we did in October was really fun, but it also allowed me to discuss the question, or to address the question of scale, that just because something's bigger, we're back to, doesn't mean it's better. I mean, the Hans Koper, some of his pieces, the tiniest pieces have the most presence. And I really would like that to be kind of part of the conversation as well, that just, bigger isn't necessarily better. And some of the pieces can be really tiny and hold a whole world. So that was a really important chance for me to raise that topic and bring it into, not everyone might agree, or people might see the pots or feel that they, whatever, but I hold that opinion strongly, that scale is not necessarily the thing. The pot needs to be right. And this last slide is where we started, so it really is a completion of the road trip of colour and glaze, and where we are today. And that's me. Thank you very much, folks.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was brilliant. And it's so generous and wonderful to be kind of taken into the process of of your process, and the kind of the avenues of discovery that come from looking at form and the glaze and then the firing and it all coming together. It's very kind of intuitive yet complicated and very detailed. It's kind of fascinating to see the kind of backstory of the pots. And as I kind of comparing, I do have a question, but I wanted to kind of ask the audience whether there are any questions for Sarah, who's very generously kind of been okay with having questions from the floor.
Very happy for questions. I think sometimes it's hard to be the first one to ask, so don't be shy. If you have any questions, it's cool.
I'll have to run down and give you the mic. So just have a think about it and get those questions ready. But I'll take you back to those slides about the kind of awful in-between stage of process and the cutting and pasting, which I kind of thought was a really interesting phrasing for ceramics, because cutting and pasting is collage, paper, etc. So hearing it being used in ceramics is really interesting. And I was just going to ask a question of how the cutting happens and how the pasting happens in a more specific way, of like when you cut, not being a maker myself, does the form collapse? Are you at constant risk of the thing kind of falling apart before you can even get it together to stick it back?
Yes and yes. Yeah, it's so it's that sweet spot, and that's where I keep saying the relationship with material, and sometimes it just can sound a bit like white noise, but if I'm tuned in enough to the clay, that there's a point where, and it literally just cutting it with a knife. I think there's a video section on my website if anybody wants to, whenever you've got a moment and you're at home Googling or whatever, there's a section that's filmed some of that cutting, so you can literally have a look at that. But essentially it's getting a knife and cutting the material and getting that point where it's soft enough that it'll take that cut and the fold, but not so soft that it will collapse. If it's too dry, yes, it'll stay standing, but it's more likely to crack. So it's very much tuned into, I keep doing this, it's about, you know, touching the rim and seeing exactly where it is. And that loads collapsed on the journey of understanding when I could get away with it and when I couldn't get away with it. The quality of the slip when I get it together. But that trial and error with each one, I'd learn from it. So loads collapsed. But then sometimes with the collapsing, you'd see a folded quality that again, that's something I couldn't draw. They go, I really like the way it folded there. So next time I'll try it, but I'll know when it's going to want to go and I'm not going to let it go. Or, you know, but it's definitely not a science. And actually, I'm not keen anymore on demonstrating. It's a funny thing. I haven't done that much demonstrating and I don't teach. But I think the last demonstration I did, I was on a residency somewhere and I felt like a total fraud after the demonstration. And I said to my husband, I felt like I was going to cry when I came off the stage. I said, I'm never doing anything like that again, because I felt like a real phony, because people were watching what I was doing, but it was almost like they were hung up on how I held the knife or which knife I was using. And I kind of felt like how I hold the knife or which knife I'm using is completely not the point. It's the way of thinking about your relationship with the material. And actually it was a thing, again, back to Mr. Cooper, it was a ceramic review thing that Joanna Constantinidis had done about cutting and altering. And it wasn't so much because the photographs, I mean, really, you know, they weren't good at describing, but it set off a notion in my head of, who says you can't take a knife to it and scudge it together and cut it and put it back together again? Who writes the rules to say you can't do that? So that way of thinking is exciting as opposed to exactly how it's done. But if one isn't tuned into the material, it won't work.
You know, that's really interesting about this. It's not a science, but what you were describing sounds incredibly scientific in a way. So there's a kind of real detail to, you know, testing all the glazes and noting, but it's a very internal, within your mind detail.
It's very, sorry.
No, and it's fascinating that it isn't science, but it's kind of very detailed at the same time.
Well, a funny thing, I was having a chat with Sebastian Blackie about this recently. We were talking about the science of glazing, and my husband is really good at understanding the science of glazes and why different ratios of that material is going to do that. If you put china clay with this, it's going to do this. I don't have any of that chemistry understanding, and we've said, you know, sometimes that chemistry understanding would be really useful for me to, you know, to get to if I had a problem with a glaze, to get the answer sooner. But actually, in terms of working in that sort of really sloppy, stick it on and put it through the kiln and see what you think, see if there's a piece you like, a section you like, it actually gets results quite quickly. Where if I understood the chemistry, that knowledge would probably slow me down. So ignorance is bliss sometimes. So.
Absolutely.
It isn't a question, it's just an understanding that for me you're not cutting and pasting, you're cutting and reshaping like you do in dressmaking. Mm-hmm. And knowing your background and your mother, do you dressmake?
Actually, if I go back to that school report, we had to do a certain amount of it in home economics in 1984, and I was not a fan. So I understand the pattern cutting principles, but and I can work a sewing machine and I can repair things, but it's not. I don't have any fabric doesn't grab me.
But you create wonderful form with that moving and understanding how. If you cut in a certain way, it will create a certain movement. Yeah,
there are definitely correlations, and but it's not where my head's at when I'm doing it. Yeah.
Sarah, with the cutting and folding, and you're obviously going to be adding a lot of slip when you're doing the cutting, how is that affecting your drying process? Do you slow it down?
No, the slip is literally just there to be the glue. that initial glue, and then very quickly after those two sections are together, that slip comes off. It doesn't interfere with the drying process at all. It just has to be there for that point of contact.
My question's kind of carrying on from that. So I wondered if you ever used like a heat gun or artificial heat to dry the clay to the point where you can manipulate it, or do you let it dry naturally?
A heat gun would, if anybody brought a heat gun into the studio, they'd be shot. It's the enemy of the surface. It does that sort of, it's a very superficial surface drying that would be the core enemy of what I'm trying to do. So if anything, it's more, I save that gorgeous, soft, shouldn't say any kind of plastic is gorgeous, but dry cleaning plastic is my best friend, because it's such a soft drape of plastic to slow and control the drying. Yeah.
You said that's not where your mind is when you're doing all this process, which seems very physical, but also very sensual. Where is your mind when you're doing this? Do you have like a standard mindset, or is completely... Because the result seems to be very disciplined in a way, like there is a real practice of thought. So I was wondering if there is some kind of spirituality and sensuality with your own brain in it.
I think the nice answer is I don't really know where my head is when I'm properly in the zone. It goes somewhere else, which is really lovely. And I'm not overthinking. But that only happens, that kind of sort of state only comes after many hours put in, or after many days. And it might be that I've had 4 rubbish days in the studio, and then I go in on the 5th day and actually something finally clicks. Or it might be 2 rubbish months in the studio and suddenly something clicks. And that's kind of challenging for my, to stay robust and strong and keep going is challenging, because you kind of have to have faith that those hours are going to pay off. And then I admitted to Matthew Hall after not this show, but the show before, that my soundtrack for the last show was Taylor Swift. I got really into Taylor Swift, and he was saying I should have never told him that, because now he sees pots differently, but it's the truth. So it's a non-thinking after loads of thinking.
I have a question in 2 parts.
Yeah.
Start with part 1. If you were able to meet yourself at the age of 15 or 20, what would you say to yourself? Any advice to young people today?
That's a lovely question, right? Actually, I'd probably say you're not a complete idiot, and probably to have more self-confidence. But you can't say that to a 15-year-old anyway. They're not going to believe you. It's like... Yeah.
We know where you are today. And if you were to meet yourself in 35, 40 years from now on, let's say at the age of 90 or 95, so what would you say to yourself? Travel more.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the absolutely beautiful talk, and for a very inspiring talk as well, for that matter.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier, when you had your studio in Cork, that you found that a lot of your inspiration, unless I'm misremembering, you said came from that sense of kind of isolation and focus, right?
Yeah.
Now that you're having all this wonderful success, and deservedly so, you no longer really have that element of isolation or that focus as you would have done back then. How do you reconcile that, or has your sort of process changed a little bit to adapt?
I would say that the focus hasn't been taken away at all. It's that I'm completely in control of it, and that's controlling the studio. I've never invited people to the studio. It's not an open studio. It's not, something that people can just pop into. So I am, and it's lovely. It's lovely that people are aware of my work and stuff. But the isolation in the studio is kept rigidly sacrosanct. So it's a no-go zone, and that's the key.
Thanks. That was a really great talk.
Thank you.
And it's lovely to hear about your work again. I was lucky to be studying here during COVID, and you gave us a Zoom talk from your studio. So that isolation, it was nice to share all of our isolation.
My heart went out to you studying during COVID, because it's such a you have to be in and you have to be making.
Yeah,
So.
we were very lucky because we got a second year to to come in, and the staff all did their best for us, and the technicians were great. Anyway, but I wanted to ask you about your the failures, the waste.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered what kind of proportion are you throwing and beginning that then aren't successful? And do you find that those unsuccessful ones, because you mentioned that sometimes it suggests a new form or a new position, but do those ever become parts of a combination of the composite pieces, or and what do you do with your waste apart from using them for glaze test?
So pieces that don't work out, that have made it right through the firings, if they've made it right through the firings, it's because I felt that they were, from a form sense of point of view, that they were good enough to push through. So those I would keep as like a drawing, a three-dimensional drawing in the studio, to remind myself what I had made that I thought was good at the time. Clock what went wrong with it. Was it something that went wrong in the firing which was related to the making? Was it something that went wrong in the firing just relating to my firing it too high or too low or whatever? I try to catch pieces that aren't successful form-wise before they ever go to a bisque, because it can be recycled. So it's really annoying from my time, my effort, waste of material, expensive material, and expensive firing, to have pushed it through those processes and for it not to work out is devastating. Unfortunately, it happens still quite a lot because of the material. So I'd love to say that I'm so on top of my game that my loss rate now these days is really low, but it's still really high. I just I do try to catch it before a firing, because I was discussing with somebody earlier, that element of it just becomes landfill. It's dreadfully wasteful from every point of view. But I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Hi, thank you for a fantastic talk. My question kind of relates to the previous lady's question about resilience and how you manage to carry on despite the high failure rate. Why do you not just give up?
That's a brilliant question, and sometimes I'm not sure. No, it's I love what I do. I'm really lucky. I just love it, and even when it's not working out, because I like to feel that, instead of it being there's a self-pity thing of, oh, it didn't work out and everything's terrible, it's to put myself back in the driver's seat of, that didn't work out because I did something wrong. So what did I do wrong and how can I fix it? Which is empowering. So instead of it being this kind of devastating thing, it's, right, screw your head on now, Sarah. What went wrong there? What did you do? And I find that that's exciting, because I suppose like anything, if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you'll get somewhere. And it's not to say I don't get sometimes a bit. I don't really get down. I think I'm lucky in terms of my character that I don't get down about stuff that much. I think, I'm really lucky in my relationship. I'm really, my home life is good. I think my mum is a very, very, very inspiring, tenacious person. She had a tricky marriage, and that house was a really challenging thing for her. And she turned it into something exquisite and positive. And there's no question but that's part of the mix.
Hi, Sarah. I'm current RCA ceramic student. So I really resonate with what you talk about, the way you make the form, the sense of attunement. For me, it's like almost like a form of listening, and I tune into the materials. So you talk quite a lot about research in terms of making on materials and glaze. I'm just curious, being studied in the art school, I'm wondering whether you do other form of research, for example, writing, or about, if so, who's writing, or what kind of other research, I guess, you do, and how that influences your work?
I would love to say that I'm an avid reader or I'm an avid writer, and I'm not. And I wish I was. It would be a much kind of more rounded story to say that I do other forms of research, and I just don't. But when I say I don't do any other forms of research, the studio practice engagement of play that's been happening for my career, and I hope will happen for forever, it's all consuming. So by the time I clock off at the end of the day, and I try to be pretty good to finish at 5, and then I try to do my emails between 5 and 6, and then have dinner and watch a movie. I love TV, but it's not research. It takes me out of myself and out of my head. Give me a good Netflix something and let me binge watch, because my head is completely full of this intense looking at forms all day, every day, which I adore, but I have to get myself out of it. So it's actually the refreshing taking myself out of it does me more good than trying to fill and feed it with something else. It's that switching off is really important.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, how did you decide this throwing and altering thing is going to be your thing? Like,
I think when...
especially early on, before you get the external validation that the collectors liking your work, how did you know this is the road you're going to go down?
I suppose I didn't really. It happened really organically when I was in Kinsale, and I was loving making, but I wasn't loving what I was making. I went down the road of getting more confident with my skill base and then being able to make forms. Just mentioning to Liz earlier, I had been doing drawings of forms in sketchbooks in my first time in college in like 1989, and there were forms that I couldn't make at the time. I didn't even understand what I was doing, but as my skill increased, I could go and revisit those forms and try and make them again. But there was definitely a sort of a blind, sort of just trundling along. I wasn't, strategically, intellectually chasing a career at all. It was something coming from inside, and I was just determined to do it, and I loved it. And I wasn't making any money, and I was working in a pub, and it was like just some kind of internal drive, and then it just seemed to click, but definitely not a master plan at all. I think that might be us with time.
Yeah,
folks.
thank you so much.
Okay.
It's so generous to kind of answer those questions, and thank you for all the people who ask questions.
Thank
to kind
you
of
very
really
much.
develop some of the things that were spoken about in the lecture. So thank you for that. Thank you all very much for coming, and thanks again to all the supporters of the lecture series. The final thanks is to Sarah. Thanks so much for coming, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks a million, everybody. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.